Hello, Miss Elizabeth. Welcome.
Hello.
So it's so good to see you. And I'm excited to chat about all things kind of like peak performance, right? Like, how do we become our best selves in really challenging situations? So thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you and have this conversation.
Well, so tell me, okay, you're a certified hypnotist, right? I'm like, make sure I say that correctly. And then like a peak performance coach.
Yeah.
And what's so funny is I remember, I think I found you on Instagram, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just remember being like, oh, peak performance, that sounds fabulous. Let me reach out to her. And your website, right, is like, clearly with it being ballet centric. I was like, oh my God, this is so perfect. And so what kind of led you into this work? Because just feels very niche.
Yeah, I don't think we ever got into my background, but it's definitely my background that led me right to where I am. I started ballet kind of on the quote unquote later side in comparison to like the 3-year-old ballerinas, right? So I started at 14 and then obviously fell head over heels as most ballet lovers do immediately. Committed myself to it and I progressed really quickly to getting a dream contract at 19. But I think, like a lot of dancers, I really struggled with that transition from student to company life. And I kind of spiraled really quickly and I ended up depressed and I had disordered eating habits and I just kind of fell apart and like ran away. I was in Chicago dancing and I ran away to Texas and, and I ended up starting to teach ballet. And as I was teaching, I was diving into self-development and healing. And so I would just naturally start teaching my students those things. And that's how I created the whole point. Originally was just bringing in journaling and mindfulness and visualization and affirmations into the ballet classes and just trying to create a space online where dancers could talk about what they were struggling with. And then I went and experienced hypnotherapy myself. And that made such a huge, like immediate change for me that I was like, oh, okay, I have to do this. And so, yeah, I went and I got certified as a hypnotist. And then I've continued training, got certified as a coach. And these tools, as we bring them into the ballet world, it just lights me on fire because I know that this will take dancers to the next level.
I mean, it's so important, right? And it's not one of those things that, you're ever taught and it's not intuitive, right? So I love that you're bringing this to, an arena that really, really needs it.
Yes. Yeah. Ballet, unfortunately, I think because it is so high demand and the structures that have been put in place over time, there's a lot of dancers that struggle exponentially with that self-criticism and that perfectionism and just all of those things that I believe are holding them back from being able to step into that peak performance, that full expression.
So tell us a little bit about some of the people that you work with and how you've helped them, right, really step into leading a more kind of peak performance type life.
Yeah. And so I've actually, on the dance side, I've found that I've worked with a lot of adult dancers or dancers who like dance professionally and then they left. And then I really think that the community, the ballet community at large, is really desiring change, and you can see it kind of all throughout the culture. But this summer was actually my first time working with some younger pre-professional dancers, and that was really fun too because I find like I love working with adults, and then as we bring it back, it spans forward and backward to a place where we're all working on the same things. And so as we can get these into the schools, I think it'll just continue to like ripple out. And then I work with all kinds of people. So I work beyond dancers. And with the hypnosis, that peak performance element, some people might not be taking to the stage, but I help people with habits like stopping smoking or biting their nails, or just those anxious looping thoughts, falling asleep better. And really, all of those elements are about stepping into your full potential, right? Being able to live your life in a way that you're able to fully express yourself and be going after your goals and dreams without having different habits that might be holding you back.
Well, I love the example, right? Nail biting. I mean, all these different things that can just be nervous tics or things that, aren't even necessarily conscious. So I love that you're able to kind of bring this work in, and listeners will talk a little bit about what some of those tools are in a moment, because it's like, it's so important. And how do we kind of reset the brain, right? Rewire, kind of get on a different path and recognize, well, yes, I've always done this, but do I need to keep doing this, right?
Yeah. And I find clients are always surprised. Like there's surprise benefits that them or I might not have been aware was even possible. I was just making a reel the other day about, how much time do you think you would get back if you were able to cut your overthinking and your self-criticism in half or even in a quarter? It's like there's so much time and energy, like you're saying, that's getting unconsciously used up, that when you can get that back, you don't even realize sometimes until afterwards all that you have available to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the overthinking, and just as you were talking earlier about with ballet, right? It is, it's such, it really is about perfectionism. It's like, and, having a certain body type. And I know that's shifting, but, there's just so much that goes into the ballet world that I think is it's toxic, and it's also inspiring, right? So it's like having all that blended together. But, it's not like after a performance necessarily, in certain settings, yes, but where people are like, oh my gosh, you did XYZ so good. It's like, next time, notice this. What were you looking at? What about your hands? And so it's right. It's this constant self-improvement. And, but I think we can do that beyond ballet, right? It's like recently I was mentioning to somebody that I had just read my first fiction book in a few years, and it was so good. I read it in 8 hours straight. I couldn't put it down. And then they were like, oh my gosh, so all those books you have stacked over your house are nonfiction? And I was like, right? So it's like we get addicted to like this like self sort of improvement. So it is interesting, right? How do you break that perfectionistic cycle?
Oh, for sure. And I can really relate. I have a self-development book obsession as well. I just love it because I think we both know a lot of the tools and we're probably utilizing them in our daily lives, but I love to constantly be inspiring myself with other people's stories and learning different techniques and tools. Like that's what excites me and really keeps lighting me up every day.
Right. And, it's like, even if we do know them, we teach them, we practice them to the best of our abilities. Sometimes it's just coming at it from a different angle or somebody else's take on it and perspective that can really be like, oh my gosh, I get it now.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I just had an experience like that recently with visualization, actually, where, obviously I'm fully sold on visualization. I teach it all of the time. I actually, just in that mini course that I was releasing, it's called Master the Stage, and it's a lot about visualization. But I kind of, in the ramp up for it, I decided to add a life coaching aspect 6 days before. And so I put it out there and I wasn't getting anyone. And I talked to another hypnotist friend and she was like, just lean into how you want it to feel at the end. Just visualize, how you want it to feel at the end. And sometimes it's like, even though I know that and I believe in it, there's this part of me that's like, that's too easy. Give me the hard stuff. Tell me how to really do it. Yeah, it's that perfectionism part, that hardworking part that's like, oh, yes, I know. I'll do that later. Just tell me what I really need to do. But then I leaned into that visualization and it was kind of little spooky. It's like every night as I would lay down, I would imagine that end call with 4 people for whatever reason. I would just imagine like having my hands on my heart and just seeing their faces. And the 4 people did not come until probably 8 hours before we started. So I had plenty of moments to completely freak out. Actually, more people than that joined the program, but on the end call, it was 4 people. And there was just this moment where I was like, what? Maybe that really is doing something.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's such a great reminder of like, okay, utilizing those tools that we believe in so deeply and we teach others. And, it makes me think too, Elizabeth, just thinking a little bit about our work. And it's funny because I've got my notebook here where I took notes from our sessions, and I should have looked them up beforehand. But what I really enjoyed, and I recall one of the pieces was the visualization, right? It was first trying to visualize the choreography, like just as you're in bed, going through it. And remember, I got stuck on like, I can't remember, do I start with the left foot or the right foot? So then I'm just like, it's a ruin. Like I can't go there. And so it was like, okay, well, so it's your right foot, A, and then B, let's, visualize kind of the performance, right? Going super smoothly and what have you. And that was really helpful. And what's funny because, I even remember before I went on stage, it wasn't nerves as much as it was like, I am so ready to show like all the work that I've put into this. Do you know what I mean? And like, okay, I'm either going to nail the pirouettes or I won't, which I usually don't, but I did. And, it's one of those things where you're just like, this is it. This is the culmination of all the hard work. And let's hope for the best, but let's have put in a lot of practice beforehand, right?
Yeah, it's that culmination of the work that you've done and then allowing yourself to step into that work and step into the flow. And I think that's really where that unconscious piece comes in, right? Yes, we need the hard work and yes, we need all of the things that we've built. But if we stay in our conscious, like overthinking, critical, analyzing, perfectionism, when it's time to perform, the unconscious can't do what it's designed to do, which is to step into that automation and that flow, right? Which is so useful when you're getting ready to perform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So important. And, and I think this is one of the pieces. And kind of if we think back to like our process of working together, it's like one of the pieces that really stands out, and you just used the word, was flow, right? It's like, because you remember seeing my first practice video, right? And it was like very staccato, might be a stretch, but not far from the truth, right? And this piece, the Lilac Fairy piece that my teacher had choreographed, was just very flowy, right? And so you were like, envision kind of water-like. And when you're in Paris, notice the light sort of flowiness, right? And so I'm just curious if you even remember, but kind of the thought process behind the way you set up our work together.
For sure. When I'm working one-on-one with someone, I almost like to imagine that I'm stepping into like a detective role because I'm really trying to find how you do what you do, right? Because really we all do performance anxiety or perfectionism or whatever the habit is slightly differently. We use the same words, but we all have different experiences and patterns and desires. So I like to try to read the subtext because so much of what we do is unconscious. A lot of people aren't even aware of how they're doing something because it's an unconscious process. So just as we work together, like finding what resonates with you, like Paris, right? For a lot of people, things that they love, that they put their time into, they have so many neural connections to that already that can be problem solving or that can be stepping into the zone. So as we find those pieces and draw out the pieces, and then we can connect them over to the areas that they want that help, right? So for me, I just love it. I love finding out how people do what they do and then kind of helping them to unpack it so that they can look at what's helpful and less helpful and create new things and rearrange. It's super fun.
It is. And I think it's really important to be able to do that. Really focused on like, okay, this typically works for most people. It's not quite working for so and so. So let's see, how do we redirect, right?
Right. Yeah. And like the way that you described being in Paris already had so many elements that were super useful for your piece, right? But I couldn't just go and use that Paris analogy with someone else. They wouldn't have the same memories and experiences and connections. So it's really fun to work one-on-one with people and hear the internal processes and then help them make those connections.
Well, especially too, I think what's interesting is, the visualizing the choreography is something that, it's such a basic and important tool. And I remember it really working for me whenever I was in high school and I did like dance squad, right? Like I could totally do it as 8 counts. But with ballet, I've never really been like, oh, I don't focus on the counts. It's more the movements. And so I've never been able to kind of wrap my head around it. And then to get so stuck at the beginning of like, I don't even know which foot I use, right? To start with. And then you, as in me, are so hung up, you can't progress from there. And so even though it's a tool that works for most people and should have worked, you're just like, okay, well, how do we redirect? So I think that's a really, really important piece to keep in mind for all of us when we're working with anyone trying to help them through a place of stuckness.
Yeah, that's so true. And also for ourselves, right? I think you can, again, like listen to podcasts, read books, and hear about things that work for people. And then sometimes when you bring them into your own life and you're feeling like, I'm doing these things and I'm not seeing the results I want to see, I think it's so helpful to remember that we do all have unique processes, and you get to take pieces of things you learn from people and rearrange them in a way that works for you.
Yes. Yes. And so, well, this leads me to the next question, right? As you mentioned earlier, the subtext, right? Because, sometimes what we're saying is not what you're really seeing. And so how do you help people figure out like, okay, here's a place of stuckness I'm identifying. What if we look at that? Or how do we go into that? How do we explore that? Because that's not easy, right? People don't love to look at those things. So tell me how you help people kind of in that area.
For sure. And so like when I'm working with people, the biggest way that I work with people, no matter what tools we're actually using, is helping them find and discover all of the ways that they can change their own brain, right? So it's like really that self-directed neuroplasticity. The more that we're learning about how our brain works, it's like the connections in our brain are constantly becoming stronger or weaker, depending on what we're doing every day. So a lot of what I feel like I do is just a re-education and helping people figure out that they are the ones who get to decide and choose what they're creating in their brain, whether they're strengthening old connections or old habits, right, that are less helpful, or creating these new ones. And sometimes, like you're saying, it can be difficult for people. I almost feel like, yes, it can be difficult for people to look at what's unhelpful. Although by the time people come to me, I feel like they're pretty ready to look at that. And I feel like usually what is more of a challenge or a stretch for people is to lean into those possibilities and what might be true for them, because they've been believing this one way or doing this one way for so long that, yeah, the idea of something new and different not only feels like scary, but it also feels a little unrealistic. And I love to show people just how quickly they can change, because then it's like, oh man, there's so much we can do here.
Well, and can you give us an example? So for our listeners, right, who are just thinking maybe like, oh, I'm a little stuck here, or I struggle with performance anxiety here, or I want to live my fullest potential. Like, how would you recommend people, begin to make those changes?
Yeah, totally. So I always tell people, like, normally when you're listening to a conversation like this and you're asked a question of like, if I could wave a magic wand and you could have anything, what would it be, right? There's something that's going to come to mind. Or you could even ask, like, if there's one thing that is an unhelpful habit Everybody has something that comes to mind. You can be honest with yourself and just go with that first thing. And then I love to help people realize that just simply by interrupting that habit or that pattern of thought or feeling or action, they're creating more neural flexibility in their brain. So every day, you could pick any example, but let's say maybe somebody's staying up too late scrolling on their phone, because this has been my problem recently. And I've been changing it. So sometimes you can get stuck in those habit loops, whether it's, performance anxiety, cravings, habits, or whatever, where you keep doing it and you're like, man, it just like, not only are you strengthening those neural connections, but you're getting kind of disheartened. Like, oh, I keep saying I'm going to change this and I'm not. So have some tools on hand, but really any time that you make a different decision. So every time that I decide to turn my phone on Do Not Disturb and plug it out by the coffee machine early, even if it doesn't happen every day that week, even if it only happens like 3 or 5 times a week, I know that I'm creating that neural plasticity. And as you do those teeny tiny actions, whether it's, not reaching for that food or putting yourself out on stage or on YouTube, it's like tiny little things. Be encouraged, because you are changing your brain and you are doing the work already. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It's those teeny tiny actions, and they really do make a difference.
I mean, huge. You know what I love about this? And let's talk a little about neuroscience, right? And I love to share this with clients, right? Because we all want to make changes. And as you said, wave a magic wand. I was like, eat less sugar. Like, right. Everything, comes to mind, right? As you think about like a nasty habit, right? Like I may have just had candy corn for breakfast. So, it's one of those things we were just like, I really, really wanted a green smoothie in my heart, So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, how do you make this change? You want it. Right? Acknowledging it, first step. And, there's all these stages to change. But the piece, that I think about is like, okay, and it sounds like what you're saying with like charging your phone elsewhere, or you keep it next to your bed, you put it on airplane mode, or you have it there, but you do not look for scrolling, right? You read on your Kindle app or something. But it's like every time we do that, we're carving deeper that neuro pathway. And the other one of candy corn for breakfast or lots of sugar is very deeply carved, right? Because that goes back, for me, 40 plus years, right? So, you're like, okay, so it's going to take a little longer to carve this new neuro pathway. But the more we do it, the more we exercise that muscle, the deeper the groove. Now, that's how I always explain it. So I'm just curious for you, like, how do you explain it? And can you give us a little bit of just like neuroscience 101?
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I explain it as well. I usually explain to clients that, the first time they do feel or think something, it's almost as if they like just drew a line in the dirt with a stick. And then every time they do it, they drive it deeper and deeper. And for most adults, we're running like 4-lane highways. So we have one little stimulus and our brain goes from A to B so fast, it's unconscious. And so I also think that's really encouraging for people to realize is like, you may really want something on a conscious level, but if there's an unconscious process happening, and you're trying to change it from this like disciplined willpower space, and that's not working, once you start working with those unconscious processes, it can happen much quicker than you might think. I just tell people like they're running those 4-lane highways. And so every time they can throw up a roadblock, whether that's choosing something else, that's doing the tapping, that's bilateral stimulation, right? There's so many ways, or just you could just simply, a really good thing for the audience might be you can just simply tune into, I'll tell people to look around and name, 3 things in the room, and then maybe 3 things they can hear, and then maybe 3 things they can feel. But simply a little tiny exercise like that, it interrupts that zoom A to B process. And in interrupting that, you're creating new pathways, which might not be super strong yet, and they might not even be exactly the direction you want, right? So say if my ultimate goal is to plug my phone in over there and turn it off at 9, and I don't do that, but I have it over here and I put it on airplane at 10:30 or whatever. That might not be my ideal thing yet, but I'm creating that neural flexibility. I'm creating more possibilities for myself so that it's easier to change. And it helps to weaken that 4-lane highway until finally your brain goes, oh, she doesn't want to do this anymore. She wants to do this. Yeah.
She does really want that green smoothie. And she's out of candy corn. So, what I appreciate that you just said, and I'd forgotten tapping. We had done some tapping. And, tapping's very hot. I don't know. I feel like everyone's talking about tapping, right? And you're like, really, how can this make a difference? So I think people question that. So can you tell us a little bit about tapping? And is there one point or affirmation or something that you would recommend for listeners as like a good gateway?
That's good. Yeah. It's funny too, because I was the biggest skeptic of tapping as well. All throughout my journey in becoming a hypnotist and a coach, I feel like that's part of what makes me such a great one is I've been so skeptical. And there's always that part of me that's being like, what? That's not real. It's not really working. But then you get the results and you're like, well, who knows why, but it works. So a lot of people have different opinions on why tapping works, whether that's the energetic points or whatnot, Chinese medicine. For me, I bring it back to just that habit road and throwing up the roadblock. When you're doing the tapping, it totally scrambles that pattern. And for the brain, it's for a lot of people, it's kind of giving that dose of dopamine that's really great for attention and change as well, because it's something different and new. The other part that I love about tapping is that it really allows you to address how you are feeling, which I think is really important. And so as you're tapping through the places and you're kind of saying like, even though I feel, anxiety, I still accept myself. Or even though I feel this, or you might even you could go with a fully transparent, fully in that feeling, like I'm feeling really angry right now. Like I'm super ticked off. And simply by doing that and acknowledging that feeling, I think that's a huge piece. And then, I don't know, is there going to be video? Okay. A 1 point tapping place for adding positive things. So if you're going to go ahead and do like a full clearing a negative feeling, I would go through the full tapping, right? And saying your statements. But this is like a little power tap. And I think we did do this. I've also taught this to my kids and it's fun to see them use it. But right in between your ring and pinky finger, I call that like your power channel. So this is where I tap to do my affirmations. And like before I go live or I do anything that I'm feeling a little bit like, ooh, about, I'll just be like, they're going to love it. I have all my resources on board. I know what I'm talking about. Like, for my kids on the way to school, I'll be like, I'm going to have a great day. Like, I'm going to find the people who really like me and we're going to have so much fun. My brain's working well, just all of those things. And for whatever reason, at the end, after we do that, I've helped them create an anchor, right? And we look at the anchor and we go, awesome. And for me, for the neuroscience piece, there can be lots of explanations for why this works. But I love for people to lean into just being like, what if this works? Like, what if this just works? Because it works, because it's interrupting and it's inspiring the brain with all those different neurochemicals. And like, I love those questions of like, what if this works? Like, what if this actually changes the trajectory of my day? Because when you can do something with that open-ended curiosity, you give yourself so many more possibilities.
Love this. And This is so great, right? Awesome. So so I'm curious, before I ask you my final question, is anything else that you would like to share with our listeners kind of around, living your full potential or getting to that space of like that magic wand or your ideal future self or your ideal presentation? No pressure.
No, yeah, totally. One of the things that I come back to every session that I have, that I got from a hypnosis mentor who was actually quoting a different hypnosis mentor. So I believe the quote is originally from a man named John Overdurf, if we track it back. But the quote, and I might mess it up, but it's something along the lines of, the best someone can ever be in your presence is how you see them in your mind. And it's kind of this idea of like unconsciously we're exchanging millions of bits of information, right? There's that subtext, there's the body language and the tone and all of the things. And so I believe one of the greatest gifts that we can give people, and we can also start to give to ourselves, but sometimes it's easier to give it to someone else first, is to see them as being like this fully magnificent expression, right? And when I listened to your podcast that you did about your journey to the stage, you read that quote by Martha Graham, which I just adore. But yeah, I think really leaning into that idea that we all have something unique that the world needs expressed. And if you can like see someone else. So when I'm going into client sessions, I love people. And so I think it's the best job ever. Is like, I get to see you and I get to see all of the things that make you so magnificent and wonderful. And you on your end live with yourself every day and you have all your lenses and your things. So sometimes you might forget how amazing you actually are. And so to lean into remembering that like we all have unique skills and abilities, and you can start applying that in your life, like maybe with your kids or your partner or somebody at work. You'll notice a shift in people when you're like really seeing them as their full expression. It opens up something for them unconsciously to be who they are. And so, yeah, that might be a little bit more woo woo, but it totally works. And so I would just say like to play with that possibility and that leaning into the idea of like, what would be possible for me if I stepped into my full potential? And again, there will be things that come to mind, right? We all have unique desires. And I think we all have those desires for a reason. And so sometimes like we have a desire and then there's a part of us that maybe doesn't feel safe or has been told something or taught something unconsciously that'll come out and try to squash it down. But really like lighting the fire of that desire and letting it grow and being like, oh, what could this be? What's possible if I allow myself to dream?
It makes me think of too, like, future self, right? Like trying to get clear or visualize or, bring to life, like what is future self?
Oh man, that is so totally probably one of the biggest things that has gotten me where I am. Is like doing affirmations with that. I'm the kind of person who, I love that. So I'll be like, I'm the kind of person who gets things done. I'm the kind of person who plugs my phone in by my coffee and gets a really good night's sleep. I'm the kind of person who does that because as soon as you fill that in, your unconscious can start to like find those opportunities and the ways that you can step into that in ways that maybe you couldn't consciously have thought of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I'm the type of person who, beautiful. So my last question for you is the name of this podcast, of course, is Tranquility du Jour. And so I'm curious, how are you making space for tranquility in your everyday?
Yeah. So, I love self-hypnosis and meditation. And I probably do that maybe 3 to 4 times a week. I just finished my habit tracker for October and I did it way more because it was on my habit tracker. But the fun, like little thing that I've been playing with for the last month, I would say, is in the morning before I get out of bed, I do like the fastest visualization of how I want my day to go. So I just like let my brain play a little movie on fast forward and like hit those key points. And when I think about different key points, it's more about like how I want to feel in that moment and who I want to be in that moment. So I don't try to like figure out how I'm going to do things, but I just let my brain kind of like spark little moments of like feeling. And then this might sound silly, but it comes from a TED Talk by BJ Foggs, who wrote Tiny Habits. And I watched this TED Talk where he was talking about this tiny habit of the moment your feet hit the floor, you just like think to yourself or say out loud, today's going to be a great day. And I've been doing that and it has been so fun. Like at first, it did feel really silly, but we had this big transition in our family where I've had to get up really early lately. And it really changed things. So I think just that tiny visualization and then hitting the floor with today's going to be a great day, even if I'm exhausted, even if I'm like have things on my to-do list that are less than what I want. It's like it's starting the day with positive expectation.
Yeah, versus like hitting the snooze and looking at your phone and scrolling and going like, oh, I really need to get out of bed. And yeah, so I love that. And listeners, I'll put a link to that TED Talk. I'll find that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. I shared that, I think, on my Instagram. I couldn't even remember who did the TED Talk, but then somebody gave it to me. So, because I watched it a long time ago, but then it came back to me recently. And yeah, I mean, I think that little tiny visualization, it takes less than a minute, really. So it's not about having some like HD perfect thing. It's just like a quick reconnect to your vision and your why, and like you were saying, that future self. I reconnect without throughout the day. Like there will be moments where I'm about to do something, I'm like, but I reconnect back to how I wanted to feel, and it's that moment to step into it.
Yes, I like that versus like, what do I want to get done? And seeing yourself like checking everything off, right? It's like, no, how do I want to feel, right? Even if I have a very full plate that day.
Yes, totally. Because I do think it's like coming back to that feeling like with the performing on stage, right? That perfectionism is a mirage. It's nothing is ever going to be perfect. But if you can lean into like how you want it to feel, because how many people can relate to really wanting to do well at something and then maybe they even did it really well, but at the end they didn't feel the way they wanted to feel. What fun is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Even if it's like perfect,
Right.
but you're miserable on stage or you were miserable leading up to it. It's like, yeah, I love that reminder of like, how do I want to feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's a treat to see you again. And thanks for sharing your kind of wisdom, obviously, around these topics with our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.